the agenda. All right, Jen, you want, or sorry, Cynthia, you want to take it away?
Well, do we have, isn't there a pledge of allegiance and some sort of official call to order?
There is, yeah. So either you or Steve are can call for that.
Okay. So, Steve, go right ahead. You're the senior person here.
Okay, well, let's just start with the Pledge of Allegiance then. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and just freedom and justice for all.
Okay, so we have two items on the agenda today, right? We have an update. We're going to review the Vegetation Management Action Plan, and we're going to review Susan Casey's letter that was received after the last meeting to prepare a response. Is that correct?
That's
Yes,
correct.
Does anything that Susan Casey says, is anything in that letter, do you think, going to affect the vegetation plan? And therefore we should address the letter first? Forgive me for being so tentative here. It's just my first time through this.
No, that's a good question. And I'll add into that, Jonathan. So you probably have I know you've met in that part of the community for months, if not longer. So I know it's an ongoing conversation and you know the citizens and the concerns up there. So do you want to give us a little bit of a background of where we stand in that Upper Highlands area and how it relates to that letter?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, it kind of plays in a little bit to the bigger picture, and kind of, I'll set the bigger picture framework right now. Hold on, there's a call. I'm just gonna say. So the way it works is right now there's kind of two different programs going on. There's the defensible space program, which is everyone has to have 100 foot of defensible space around their property. And then there is the weed abatement process for land that is usually not developed. So it's an undeveloped parcel. And it usually relates to weeds, essentially. If there's grass, we go and hire a contracting mower to come out and do that work. That work usually costs the district about $30,000 a year to get done. Now, the issue that's arisen that I think is what Susan Casey's referring to is there are undeveloped parcels of land that have brush and timber and slash and are on steep slopes that don't fall under the weed abatement process, don't fall under the defensible space process, and are what citizens are concerned about because there's these plots of land that have brush and timber and whatnot. We did a small assessment, or not small, I mean, a deputy fire marshal has spent since the last time the board met going through all of the undeveloped parcels in the high fire area and the SRA. And we're up over about 200 parcels that would fall into that. And extensive work, right? We're talking about bringing in tree trimming companies, companies that have to work on, or contractors that have to work on steep slope to pull out a lot of heavy brush. And just kind of an estimate we were doing yesterday in the office was, if on average it was, you know, $20,000 to $25,000 per plot, that's the kind of level of work we're talking about. You know, the district is looking at, you know, a $5 million plus outlay to abate those lots, and that's way beyond the $30,000 of the weed abatement that we usually do on the weed abatement ordinance. And it really comes down to kind of process, right? Is the board really in their charter have the kind of guidance to outlay that much capital to abate a nuisance?
$5 million sounds like a very substantial sum.
It's substantial, and it's not, and that's just once, right? This is going to be a recurring issue that comes up. And at the end of the day, it's not the district's, it's the property owner's responsibility to adhere to the ordinances. We really come into the grander question of where does our enforcement end and the landowner responsibility begin? Because that doesn't include any sort of staff time. So just the program management of this as well, you're looking at least 1 or 2 additional people to manage the entire program. And that gets up into, $300,000 to $400,000 worth of staff commitment in a contract as well.
So totally understandable, Jonathan, of the scope of trying to affect this. So with that knowledge that you've gained this week in the numbers, then where do you stand on what the solution is and how to move forward? Again, all these are questions so I understand the response to the neighborhood concern. Do we have options? Do we work with the county? Is there somebody else that's also trying to, obviously other communities are trying to solve these same kind of issues. Where are we at then?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to a kind of what the board's appetite is for engagement on undeveloped parcels that are beyond weeds, right? Is the board looking to start a large-scale vegetation management program for all of those undeveloped parcels that include staff and a significant amount of money to abate them? That's really a policy issue. We just take direction from the board on that. My personal view and experience on this is we very quickly get we get kind of a little bit away from our mission as the district, which is a very response-driven mission, and especially in those SRA areas where it's the landowner's responsibility. That's what it really comes down to. The way I like to kind of compare it is the CHP doesn't come around to everybody's house and look at your tread depth on your tires. But if you get in an accident and your tread depth is not to code, you're going to be held liable. And that's a little bit where I kind of have to find that balance, because these landowners need to understand that if there's a fire that occurs on their property, they're going to be held liable, right? Like they could be responsible for they could bear the full cost of response or damage for that fire. And that is something that I think maybe we could do a better job of messaging when we notice people. Is like, hey, this is your responsibility. You are taking on the financial liability of should a fire break out, your property not adhering to the ordinance.
But just a couple of questions. How successful are we in collecting the fees from property owners who the district does do their vegetation mitigation or any of these in addition to parcels beyond weeds? What is our percentage of return on getting people to own up to pay what they owe?
Yeah, so we only have we have two avenues basically for enforcement. One is we can litigate against them. We can literally sue the property owner, and that's just expensive and takes a lot of time. The other thing we can do is we can send it to the district attorney and let the district attorney take on the case, but they have they're limited in their bandwidth as well, and obviously prioritize. So those are kind of the two mechanisms. I believe we could also cite as a district, but even if you cite someone, it doesn't mean that they're going to pay. So that's why abatement tends to be the big option, because the district is taking on the responsibility of doing the work and then putting it on the tax roll. But I will say some of these properties in El Granada, they don't pay tax. That means someone's walked away from the property because they wanted the water rights, or they wanted, you know, they've owned the property for so long. It's not as though it's going to be 100% kind of return on any sort of abatement.
And if they walk away, we don't get any sort of abatement that comes back to us through the county tax.
They don't have to pay taxes. Obviously, the county could go through the process of kind of taking possession of the property, but that doesn't solve our problem of getting the revenue.
So this is, you know, so this is pretty much of a loss leader to fix these properties. So then you get to the cost benefit analysis of, is it better to invest proactively? Like you said, most of the time we are in a response mode, but proactively, do you really reduce the fire danger? You know, $5 million plus 3 people's worth of salaries by mitigating all of these areas, these 200 parcels. Is there that substantial a fire risk reduction by cleaning those areas up?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't think anyone has the magic metric of how you measure that, right? Arguably anything in a high fire hazard severity area, if you mitigate, is reducing the risk, but how you value that against whatever, let's say $5 million, is really difficult to quantify.
So we're seeing things like Supervisor Horsley puts $1 million into a program to help mitigate the hazards in Quarry Park. And we see that yesterday, I don't know what his rank is, but firefighter Sampson with the county forestry service was doing tours of the new fire mitigation issues up along Skyline in what we call Range 4. Those are all efforts which can be pinpointed to say, okay, you know, we're listening to the community, we hear these concerns, we're investing in mitigation. Do we have a message like that? And is these 200 parcels that we're talking about, is that the core of what people are asking the fire marshal to do?
Yeah, so a little bit, I'll deviate a little bit there, Cynthia, because what Horsley is talking about with Quarry Park is public land.
Okay.
So that's a really big distinction, is Quarry Park is the responsibility of the county, so it's public land, so the county is responsible for maintaining it. What Rich is working on with Fire Safe along 35 is a multi-agency roadside fuel reduction project that includes Caltrans, some private property owners, Mid-Penn, to basically say, hey, if we can clear a majority of the roadways along 35, at least we have an evacuation route that's viable. Where we would not want to get into is we would not want to take district money and do the work without recouping the money back from the property owner, because that is a gift of public funds. You're now saying, hey, property owner A, we're going to actually use all of the tax money for your property and help you out, but we're not going to do it for property owner B. So that's why it has to follow an abatement process. It has to get noticed. They have to have the opportunity to abate the issue. And then we have to actually hire a contractor and take action after that, recouping it on the tax roll of the following year.
Jonathan, in this Upper Highlands neighborhood where you've had these conversations, and I'm sure you've explained with yourself and Rich, I assume you've had these kind of conversations that we're having with those homeowners, right? As in the there's not really a solution, basically. There's not a financial solution that the district can take on. What is their response to you in those community meetings?
Yeah, I think everybody, my interpretation of it all is that there's a general sentiment out there that every government agency needs to be doing more to reduce the risk, but not fully understanding that this really comes down to property ownership responsibility.
Right.
That's really the policy decision of the board, is how deep into landowner responsibility does the board want to get, as far as mitigation is concerned? Because right now, the board obviously says weeds is an issue. We do that annually. Annually, the weeds are abated throughout the district. But does the district believe that, you know, brush and limbing is also so much of an abatement issue that it needs to get mitigated? But I think the general sentiment amongst the community is really one of wanting more done. And I understand that from public lands. Where I come back to on private lands, which is what, you know, predominantly we respond to in the district, is our mission is really to respond and prevent. Mitigation is kind of a whole new ball of wax that opens up a lot of kind of management and policy decisions from the board's perspective.
Jonathan, my follow-up question is, what conversations have happened at the DA level? So I can picture that. So from a legal standpoint of how do you hold a property owner accountable everywhere from these abandoned properties. You know, I know there's factors of where you can change for the future and not allow those water transfers without some obligation to the maintenance of the property. But again, that's moving forward to future lots, not the ones that it's already happened to. And I appreciate your comment that the DA, this isn't going to be a priority for them to try to deal with abandoned properties with the workload that they're probably asked to do. So can you share anything from the conversations you've had and I don't know if county councils is a relatable term to this, or if it's strictly DA office. I mean, what legal feedback do you get about the practicality of trying to address this issue?
Yeah, so our fire marshal's office obviously is in contact with the DA's office. It's really a bandwidth and priority issue, right? If there's 214 parcels coming at them for correction notices that are, you know, pretty minor, it's, you know, it's not like they can take on that workload for the district. That's why the litigating is really the avenue that legal comes back to, is it's a legal issue between the district and that property owner. And that at the end of the day is very expensive, and you get into, you know, a massive amount of litigation. That's why the alternative comes out to be, well, you can abate it then. If you think it's that much of a hazard, you can abate the actual hazard and try to recoup the costs. So it's a ball of wax. It's not an easy fix. I think we've just started to peel back the onion on this over the last couple months, and really setting the expectations with the community is probably the most difficult part, because everyone wants something done right now for their neighbor's parcel, or, you know, the unimproved parcel behind them.
Yeah,
So,
and go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
Just the question, and we can get to it, and it might come after Cynthia's questions, is what is the messaging to the community then? And then this is a two-part question. So, because it came up between Cynthia and I, does the board reply to this letter? And it seems like it's more like it's a staff response. Again, if the board starts crossing over and responding to letters of concern that come from the community, would we agree that falls under staff's responsibility to address that with the board's guidance?
Yeah.
So that's my first question. Is that seems like what we've done in the past, and for good reason, because we don't have the knowledge of the conversations that have happened and the complexities of the issue.
Right.
And then with that, then what is the messaging from the board through staff? Because basically we're saying we can't really do much for you. in regards to your concern about these abandoned lots?
Yeah, so I think,
So
what
those
I
are
think,
my two questions. What is the messaging and who gives the message?
yeah, so on the messaging, I'll kind of confront Susan Casey's kind of first and probably most specific request, which is about the eucalyptus, right? That was really what a lot of her letter revolved around. And, I think a big win that we've had is we've worked pretty hard with Horsley and RCD and Parks to get that, and planning to get that moratorium on needing a permit to remove eucalyptus trees, right? Like literally anyone can go on their property right now and remove a eucalyptus tree, no permit, nothing, which is unheard of in the past. And that was based on a letter that we got from Chief Larkin that said, hey, due to these extreme circumstances. So I think, first of all, we've appeased the concern about the eucalyptus and just the ability to do it. Now, nothing says in anywhere that unimproved parcels that those people have to remove their eucalyptus trees, right? It's just not, it's not anywhere. It's not in law. It's not in policy. It's not any regulation. If you own a piece of property, you have all the right in the world to have a eucalyptus tree on it. Where we do recommend is if it's within 100 feet of a structure that you limit up. But I think where we get really confused is the ask from Susan is, please do more to remove all the eucalyptus trees from the undeveloped lots. And that, the number we talked about, 5 million, that doesn't even include tree removal. I mean, you can go anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 to remove a eucalyptus tree with a private contractor. It is, I don't believe it is practical for the district to get into the undeveloped parcel tree removal business, because then we are going to talk about a whole different conversation regarding staffing and management of what that actually costs. But to give you kind of an answer to those two questions, Steve, one, I think the letter she wrote it to the board, so I think it may be unprofessional for me or staff to write back to her. It's really a conversation she wants to have with the board.
Okay.
And then as far as kind of messaging to the community, I think on our plan, we kind of talk about producing something to maybe a letter to the we talk about it next year, a Coastside vegetation management flyer explaining the vegetation management responsibility and requirements in the district. And I think that we're still on track for that, is to kind of go through this year in our learnings and get the feedback and then really message back to the community, hey, here's how vegetation management works on the coast. And kind of reset those expectations. I will say, I think things have died down a little bit since the eucalyptus tree ordinance or the tree ordinance moratorium went into place. But, talking to Nick Calderon at Parks, there's still a lot of community engagement regarding the issue.
So,
And then one final point to that. So it'll be a board response to her letter, and that will be through council would most likely write that letter, or would that be something that Gary would write after a discussion of it?
Yeah, either way, I think it can be either. I think that's really up to probably Gary to decide how he wants to respond. Yeah.
so again, I just keep apologizing because I am so new at this and my perspective is different because I don't know very much. But as I read her letter, I think she addresses things rather thoroughly. I don't feel defensive about it. I don't feel, and not that anybody else does either, but I don't read her letter as accusational. I read her letter as a pretty well-researched set of concerns.
Mhm.
And while it's very granular, she's listing particular things. I think it's a reflection of how personal their concerns are in the El Granada Highlands.
Mhm.
And even if we didn't send the letter back to her like this, if we prepared almost a point by point response, what would our response be? For example, she does talk, of course, as you said, about the eucalyptus in the beginning, but then she goes through these partial inspections and she's saying, what are we doing about each particular parcel? What if we name names? I mean, can we assign the names of the owners of these properties? Are we allowed to publish that sort of thing? It's got to be a matter of public knowledge, right? It's on somebody's public property ownership rolls, right?
Yeah, so before we get into specific lots, Cynthia, I would just suggest we actually don't talk about specific lots in a public forum in case this does go to litigation. If we want to talk about specific lots, that would be perfect for closed session.
Okay.
I think we can talk systemically right now about the program and kind of process, but if we're getting into lots and specifics, I think just to prevent anything becoming an issue later down the line, that we take that to closed session.
I appreciate you telling me that. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So let me rephrase, as a policy, then one point you could take to this, if someone was this concerned about individual property levels, they themselves could go to the county tax, real estate, whatever, and find the names themselves. But is there, as a policy overall, because the responsibility is that of the property owner, is there, and not for any other reason, right? This is not, but what she's asking in this letter, as I read it, is to sort of connect responsibility with an action plan. So if the action plan is that the property owners are to mitigate their own parcels, whatever they are, that then is there any value in promoting individual responsibility and response and accountability to going forward, connecting the names of those property owners with the properties that actually need mitigation? The 200 or so, however many properties there are or will be in the future, not pertaining to any particular property owner right this minute at all. Is that a policy that because that's what she's asking, is who are these people who aren't meeting their responsibilities? And she's asking, I'm looking down here to her words. It was my hope that pressure could be put on these non-complying owners, etc. Now, again, I want to stay out of exactly what you said, which is any sort of individual culpability. And she goes on about why that's true. And this is not a personal thing against any property owner. This is a desire to enforce an action plan.
Right.
And as you've described, the tricky part of this is that owners may not understand this is their responsibility, A, or if they do know it is, they may not care because they've walked away.
Right.
So, but as a board, we're still responsible for the citizens that live in our area adjacent to those parcels. Is that correct?
Sorry, say that again, Cynthia.
Am I making everybody nervous here? Should I just stop and go a different path?
No, that's a good question, and I'll follow with that question.
Okay.
Basically, is it what responsibility do we have as directors? Is that what you're asking? And that's kind of my question, is because at the end of the day, we say, really, as a board, we can't take that on. It doesn't fall to us. It's not achievable. And then we have a $500 million loss in El Granada, and it comes back and it says, those 5 directors had an opportunity to take an action and they didn't, right? That's kind of how it sits with me. And that's in being my first and yours, Cynthia, the first time being serving as in a governing role. Those are the questions I have to ask. And I think there's somewhat of a different question than Chief Larkin or Chief Cox would have to answer to, because that's, again, we're giving the direction to the agency on what action to take. And that's where I'm comfortable in what Chief Cox is explaining in the political and financial realities of it. But then there's always the side, is in my role as governing, how do I make that decision? And Jonathan, I'm ready for your input on that too. And again, this is our ongoing, for me in this role, and for you as the chief, our ongoing role. It looks like these kind of questions take constant definition and defining. So can you speak to that, Jonathan, of how this role between director and policy, and again, it's a delicate dance, and anybody, whether you're serving on a school board or a city council, but you deal with more than just this fire board from a political level. So what can you say to that point?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things. One is, as the board members, you guys represent the constituents, right? So it's really about, is what the constituency wants is a deep expansion of the kind of clearance of vegetation on undeveloped lots. And I think if that's the case, then it's a matter of how do we develop a program over the next few years to implement that.
Right.
The fire code is pretty clear in the district, and I just pulled up the specific section. It says clearance of brush, vegetation growth, and combustible material from lots. All lots shall be cleared of brush, vegetation growth, and combustible material upon written notification by the Coastside Fire Protection District. So we have the authority to do this, right? I think where we're at right now is we realize that although we have that authority, if we were to implement it across the entire districts kind of equitably or equally, we're looking at a massive project that is not just mowing. It is going to the next level of clearing of lots. And maybe it is looking at, maybe a good recommendation to the board is to say, hey, let's bring a consultant in to scope this, to say what is the potential cost, what is the potential staffing needs, what is the let's look at this problem and see what it would cost, because I think we can anecdotally right now provide a little bit of input as we try to do our normal duties. But if this is growing to be such a concern at the kind of constituency level, then let's get someone to come in and actually study this and give us an answer on what it would actually cost and what the commitment would be. Because I think to get a formal report like that makes it a lot easier to make a decision from the board and be like, oh my gosh, this has been looked at pretty deeply. I don't think as somebody who's trying to manage the agency and the people who already have a full workload, that we can do the work necessary to get really definitive scientifically what this is going to cost.
I completely understand that and agree with you on that, because if it was within our current funding and our current staffing, it'd already be done, and it is in fact this climate change, and it is the pressure put on by the fires around us that are both pressuring the fire agencies to stay in a response mode and frightening the citizenry into thinking there needs to be a bigger proactive response from the Coastside Fire Protection District to protect us in advance of this sort of fire. So these are not new pressures on the Coastside Fire Protection District, but they are certainly undeniable pressures.
Yep.
And if we have to shift our focus or figure out a way to be more proactive with the dual focus on it's the responsibility is on the owner of the property, and how are we going to be, for lack of a more sophisticated term, repaid? How are we going to collect the funds from these owners if they fail to do it, and therefore we have to do it and incur costs in doing so? So it's that, what is the problem? You know, what is the scope of the problem? What is what is the message or the best action with owners to apprise them and to enforce that they should be doing these things? And then if they just don't, and we go in and do it, what are our best avenues for restoring the money to our own funding sources so that we are sustainable?
Yep. I think, you know, it really comes down to, if we were to get someone to come in and take a look at this and give us a little bit of an assessment, it's almost like assessing the weed abatement program and kind of opportunities and costs of expansion, right? Like, how is it working right now? What would it cost to do more? What are those areas, and what are the recommendations? I think that would be a good kind of starting point. I would recommend that this committee, as part of the agenda, at maybe next month's meeting, that we start the scoping process of what that RFP would look like, and then hopefully have something that we could take back to the board, maybe meet a couple times between now and the next meeting, and something that we could bring back to the board for approval next month to say, hey, this is an RFP we'd like to go out with.
And a place to start with that might be this letter. You know, what she's saying, and again, I know this must be a little frustrating, Chief Cox, because this is such a granular, lot like next door kind of, you know, tiny approach, and you're looking at the very big picture.
Right.
But this is a member of the public saying, you know, here's some lot numbers. I'm not going to name anything. And two of them, and they're mentioned, have been mitigated. Thank you. She says, how can I find out? Are the letters still being sent to these other property owners? Where are we in the process? What's the plan? You know, from the bottom up, the message is just really accountability. That's what they're asking. Where do I go to learn this information? Or can you assure me it's being done? And then from your perspective, and I don't mean you personally, but from the perspective of the bigger picture, what does it cost? You know, from a just flat out expense, and also from personnel standpoint, to put into place something that looks at 200 parcels and does something about it. But if we obviously we can't do it all at one time, but if we present the scope of the problem and a way forward for approaching a policy that would address this, and we could share that with the public, at least they would see what we are doing in response to their concerns. And I don't say this as you know, I'm not a politician. I don't say this from a political standpoint. I say it from here we are, responsible representatives of residents. And we want to put what their need in terms that are both practical, in terms of achieving, because $5 million off the top doesn't sound very practical. We have to figure something out. And also something that really is responsive to the level of their concerns. Right.
Yeah, I agree. It would be important for us to engage on that. Yeah, I don't, my concern is just overcommitting the staff we have on something that is not, that, you know, we're doing more plans and reviews and inspections in the fire marshal's office than we've ever done before. So we really have to think too about staff capacity as we make those sorts of decisions.
Absolutely.
Because a quick reach out to a member of the public for the fire marshal's office obviously turns into something more, and there's planning and presentations and then follow-up. And I think that just is a good, also an additional conversation to have with the board to say, hey, does the fire marshal's office even have the capacity right now? You know, we're still leaning pretty heavily on the county, a WUI expert, Austin Seeley, on this. We're kind of getting a recommendation from the fire chief regarding staffing the fire marshal's office may also be a good concurrent thing to do in addition to the studying of the undeveloped parcels.
Absolutely, because as a board, we can't say who should be doing what, right? But we can ask, we can say, this is what needs to be done. If we were going to do this, how would you operationally go about doing it without making any specific recommendations? And you could come back and tell us, is that correct?
Right, yeah, and it may even come out as a part of the study is kind of staff's capacity to implement something like this. Right,
and we were talking about that, and there was an individual who was coming back who might be, or this or that. I mean, I'm not suggesting any individual. I'm just saying this really is a follow-on conversation to exactly what we were talking about when we were looking at the vegetation action plan, which my copy's a little marked up at this.
That's good.
But it does say number 5 here, 4, sorry, in August of 2021. No, I'm sorry, it's produce and send an informational mailer about living with wildfire defensible space and evacuation plans.
Yes, and let me share it with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was out to print. Let me pull it up. I'm trying to look on my screen.
This is called being right on top of something when you've got it there to show us. That's amazing.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so here is, nope, there it is. So it is gonna go out in the districts. Basically what it is just wildfire safety and evacuation information.
Right.
So it'll be folded down the middle. It goes by steps. So step 1 is get ready. And that does defensible space, fuel reduction, working before doing work on your property. 2 is get set with prepare action kits, what to take. And then 3 is go, when to evacuate. So it kind of goes from getting ready regarding vegetation management, defensible space, to get set, getting your house set, and then when to leave. There's a piece about having your safety plan, who to contact, neighbors, other important contacts, and then a kind of a checklist on supplies that you should have. And then finally, the last page is all about evacuation zones and zone haven, how to get to zone haven and find your zone, what evacuation statuses mean, kind of a QR code to get to it, and then how to sign up for SMC alerts and how information will get sent during an emergency.
This is great. And this is an update and an expansion of an older one that was specifically said El Granada across the top.
Yep.
And since I have the opportunity to go to all of these fairs and all of these neighborhood meetings and all of these things constantly up and down the coast where people are asking for information, that El Granada Ready one was the #1 requested document or brochure or handout prior to something that the state put out called the Disaster Ready Guide,
right?
Which has some of these components, but certainly not all, and is not as locally based as this says, which is perfect. Does this one say clearly vegetation mitigation on a property is the owner's responsibility?
No, it just talks about defensible space.
Okay.
Because this is really looking at people who are living on their land, right? This is for people who live in the district. I think doing a follow-up for next year when we're talking about vegetation management specifically, I think that's where we plan to do the one with.
Where Uncle Sam is pointing at you and saying,
Yeah,
it's your job.
yeah, and we did. We worked obviously with the printer on removing the El Granada specific map,
Right.
because the issue we were getting into is we had to have all these different plans for all over the county, and we said, hey, we have a platform, people can go on there, see the way out of their zone. So I think this will be much more applicable countywide.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah.
This is, thank you. A lot of work went into that piece. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Jonathan, to our conversation that we're having today, and I often bring this up, and as far as messaging through the media, and I'm quite aware of I won't use the word danger, but the complexity of that process, because you're trying to address issues, but for the one issue you address, it opens three more. It changes the forum. Is it an advantage in any way to work with the publisher and local media to kind of tell, without sending a flyer to each home of these are what your responsibilities are, but to tell that story, say through the review of these are the complexities that in decision making the district's trying to achieve? Or have you found in your past practice that that's would cause more difficulty than results?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think where I struggle with that is we always hear from the kind of community advocates, right? So we have a pretty small group of people that we hear from fairly often. Is how widespread is that opinion, right? Is it top of mind to everybody, or is it a few individuals? And what is the best way to speak to them or engage with them? I always come back to, as a citizen, I like to be talked to directly. So maybe there's an opportunity from a letter from me to everyone in the district that just says, hey, we understand vegetation management's an issue. We understand this. Here's my perspective on it, right? Like, it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just one or the government's responsibility. And, we have an action plan. We're looking at how we abate weeds, but we're not going to solve the problem right now. This is a 100-year issue that's evolving, and it's going to take us some time to get out of it. So I think that's a potential option.
I like that, Jonathan. And I like that we share somewhat of a progressive view on that. We've never had to do this before, but the world is not like it's ever been before. And to go back to your analogy of tread depth and CHP, if we had thousands of cars sliding off the road in December, there would be pressure on the CHP to come up with some kind of either messaging or changing inspection laws, or have, I would give you an example of when you had a smog check, they check your tire depth. If it became a life loss, property loss issue, CHP would have to do something beyond what they normally do above the statute that they have written. So I try to look at my own role and encourage all of us as a group working with you to kind of keep that open thought of like, yeah, this is the reality. This is where the hard decisions are. So, but what's the movement forward? So when you speak of a letter like that, I put that in that progressive view of like, okay, never had to write a letter like this before, but we've never been faced with issues like this before. So I would encourage that.
And right along with that, being able to say what we are doing as opposed to, we can't fix this all at once, because that's not what they want to hear.
Right.
Do we hear the problems they're having, and what are we doing to fix them? So if I don't know if this would be helpful, but I so agree that what people want to do is talk to someone, Chief. And your whole idea of having a letter to them with a name at the bottom is something that, with all the things that we are doing going forward. But if I just ghosted a response, not that we would ever, ever, ever send it, but if I were to say, dear so-and-so, not to just one letter, because you're right, we're a huge organization, can't just respond quickly, to one specific situation. As I read this letter, if I were writing her an answer, what would I want to be able to say? Now, I don't have all the answers to her questions, but I could leave some blanks in there, which would be only as a study, not to send to anyone, except perhaps our discussion group. What would be the points that she's looking for? What would we want to be able to say? And then as you review it, Chief Cox and Director Stockman, you could say what about that we actually could include in a letter back to everyone. Because again, our success as messages is not going to be stand back, Coastside Fire Protection District Board of Directors, that day is kind of over with public messaging. It's going to be, we hear you. That's how it starts. We hear you. And we want to acknowledge that these are legitimate concerns. And here are the things we are honestly working on to respond. Oh, in addition to keeping all these fires fought and all these other situations we're dealing with under control with a limited budget and a limited staff, not limited by talent, but limited just by hours in the day and ability to do this much with what the resources we have. So it's that sort of, it seems to me that the messaging, Director Stockman, which I know is something that is a real issue right now for both of us, is that it's flipping over from a impenetrable sort of board situation to a human to human response, because the bottom line here is people are worried. They're worried, and that's what they just want to know is, what is my municipal organization that is fire service response doing about these things? I know I'm telling Noah about the flood here. I know there's nothing new in what I'm saying. I'm just, does this make sense? Does this resonate? Or am I just sounding like some sort of, bleeding heart, ear to the ground, not looking at the big picture person?
No, I'm following you completely, Cynthia, and I agree. And then you've got to combine that with the work that Jonathan and Rich have done face to face, and talking to those property owners where this letter comes from. They've made it. It sounds like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but you've met with them in person. You've met with them as a neighborhood. So you've addressed that, and it still doesn't. Again, it brings up more questions and an additional letter, and maybe a solution does lie in that, of not being a specific response just to that section of that one of our neighborhoods, but a letter to the entire community. So.
Yeah. I know that Nick Calderon from Parks, we were talking yesterday, and he was exploring having a kind of town hall to get all of the agencies together to have an opportunity to kind of discuss our different roles.
Right.
And maybe that this would be a good opportunity, if that were to occur, to kind of use that letter as an invite. Say, hey, I know there's a lot of concern out there, not just from us, but from all the agencies. Come join us. I think you may learn a lot. We would love to hear what you have to think and say, and we can share our plans a little bit more explicitly.
would that be an opportunity for the response to this issue to come from all local government and not just the district and CAL FIRE? Would that be, or would that be more complicated, or would it be more like, here's what county government's doing, here's what county public works is doing, here's what county parks is doing? This is the message from all of us, that please join us in trying to find these solutions, but they're not simple solutions.
Yep, they're not simple, they're not quick, and they're not cheap, right?
Right.
We're not living on land that's easy to manage. It's a tough area.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. We've taken a lot of your time today on a very busy fire time.
No worries. Yeah, I appreciate it. The only other thing on there that I wanted to hit on is just, I met with Michelle yesterday regarding getting more information on the website, and I will continue to push that along. My request is just if there's any sites or any references online that you'd like to see, that that you send them my way so we can get them on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should? Congratulations for having item number 4 here all set to go right on schedule.
You know, I work on deadlines, Cynthia.
You sure do. A lot of them. So thank you very much. Is there anything coming up you'd like to make us aware of, or you would like for us to work on in advance?
Not that I'm aware of. I think starting to really scope out what a study would look like for RFP, to get a consultant's perspective on what the cost would be and what the potential would be. I think it'd be really good to start brainstorming what you would like to see as far as the scope of work, and then
Should we set a meeting to do that?
Yeah, well, I would prefer if we met like pretty soon, have a couple meetings before the September meeting.
Let's do it.
Like maybe the week of the 1st of September. Where are we at? We're on a Thursday right now, so that would be like the 2nd.
Okay.
If possible.
Sounds great.
And then maybe the 16th would be the next one.
Sounds good. September 16th.
Does that work for you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm available for both.
Okay, perfect. I'll get those invites out, and we'll get planning and get a document at least to start batting around as far as what we're looking for scope.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being willing to take such fast action on this.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for spending your morning with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan.
Anytime. Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it.
And Cynthia, I'll reach out to you. Cynthia, I'll reach out to you, and we'll talk once before we make our presentation to the board next week.
Perfect. I'll stand by. Thank you.
I have a question. This is Gene again.
Yes.
Would those meetings you're setting up for the 1st and the 16th be again at 9 a.m.?
Yes, I believe so, Gene.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, as long as because I always have another Thursday meeting at 10:30. So this is fine because I'm done just in time.
Okay, and we'll add review and approval of the minutes from this one to the next one for the committee meeting.
Okay, so when that means you need to have the minutes for this meeting to you by
probably Monday the 30th.
By Monday the 30th. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And I have a deadline. I like you. I work on my deadlines.
Perfect.
Thank you.
For this, you don't want everything you guys said, just kind of general discussions. This was discussed, that was discussed.
Yeah.
Because action minutes means you didn't really take any action, but you do want kind of a gist of what you guys talked about.
Yeah, a very general gist. I think Kai said it, by law, I think it's only just action minutes at the minimum, but, a little bit of color in there is always helpful to refresh our minds when we reread them.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Talk
Thanks.
soon. Talk to you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.